The dying sun bled crimson across the horizon, painting the cracked earth in shades of rust and shadow. Wind howled through the canyon passes, carrying dust and the distant cry of a lone coyote. The town of Bitter Creek squatted like a wounded animal on the edge of nowhere, its weathered buildings leaning against each other for support against the relentless assault of time and weather. Jake Sullivan guided his horse down the main street, his hat pulled low against the stinging sand. At 32, he carried himself with the weariness of a man who'd lived twice that long. A jagged scar ran from his left temple to his jaw, a souvenir from the war that had ended 15 years ago but still haunted his dreams. He'd come west to forget, to lose himself in the vast emptiness where a man could disappear if he wanted to badly enough. The Broken Wheel Saloon beckoned with its promise of whiskey and anonymity. Jake tied his horse to the hitching post, his movements deliberate and economical. Inside, the air hung thick with smoke and the sour smell of spilled beer. Men hunched over cards and bottles, their faces weathered maps of hard living. That's when he saw her. She stood near the bar, her back straight despite the obvious exhaustion in her bearing. Her dark hair was pinned up properly, but wisps had escaped to frame a face that might have been beautiful if not for the shadows under her eyes and the tight set of her mouth. Her dress, though clean, showed the wear of long travel. She couldn't have been more than 25, but something in her eyes spoke of losses that aged a soul beyond its years. 3 men had cornered her against the bar. Jake recognized the type, drifters who mistook a woman alone for easy prey. "Come on, sweetheart," the largest one slurred, his breath reeking of rot-gut whiskey. "A pretty thing like you shouldn't be drinking alone. Let old Bill here buy you something nicer than that watered-down swill." "I said no, thank you." Her voice was steady, but Jake caught the slight tremor underneath. "I'd appreciate it if you'd leave me be." "Hear that, boys?" Bill laughed, a harsh sound like rocks grinding together. "She'd appreciate it. Ain't she proper?" His hand reached out to touch her arm. "Maybe you need to learn how things work out here. A woman without a man's protection." The lady asked to be left alone. Jake hadn't meant to speak. He'd spent years avoiding other people's troubles, but something about the way she held herself, proud despite her vulnerability, had moved him before he could stop himself. Bill turned, his bloodshot eyes trying to focus. "This ain't your concern, stranger." Jake stepped closer, his hand resting easy near his holstered Colt. "I'm making it my concern." The saloon grew quiet. Men who'd been pretending not to notice suddenly found their drinks fascinating. The bartender began moving bottles off the bar. Bill's companions shifted nervously. They knew the look of a man who'd killed before and would do so again without losing sleep. It was in the eyes, flat and cold as winter stones. "We don't want no trouble," one of them muttered, tugging at Bill's sleeve. For a moment, violence hung in the air like heat lightning. Then Bill spat on the floor near Jake's boots and turned away. "Ain't worth it anyway. Probably just another used-up dove trying to act respectable." They shambled out, leaving behind a wake of muttered curses and hostile glares. Jake remained where he was until the door stopped swinging, then turned to the woman. "You all right, ma'am?" She studied him with eyes the color of strong coffee. "I didn't ask for your help." "No, ma'am, you didn't." Jake touched the brim of his hat. "My apologies for interfering." He started to turn away, but her hand on his sleeve stopped him. Her touch was light as a bird's wing. "Wait, She withdrew her hand quickly, as if burned. "Thank you. I'm not usually so ungracious. It's been a long journey." "Where from?" "Back east, Missouri." She didn't elaborate. And Jake didn't press. Everyone in the territories was running from something. "You got people here?" A bitter smile touched her lips. "No people anywhere now." Jake understood that kind of alone. He signaled the bartender. 2 whiskeys, the good stuff. Sam, not that coffin varnish you usually pour." "I don't even know your name," she said as Sam set down 2 glasses of amber liquid. "Jake Sullivan. And yours?" Grace Porter." She sipped the whiskey and coughed slightly. "I'm not much of a drinker. It's an acquired taste." Jake nursed his own glass, aware of the curious glances from around the room. A lone woman in a saloon was unusual enough. One sharing drinks with the town's most notorious loner was downright scandalous. "Those men," Grace said quietly. "They were right about one thing. A woman alone out here." She trailed off, staring into her glass. "You looking for work? Mrs. Chen runs a boarding house. She might need help." "I tried there first. She said she had no positions available." Grace's fingers tightened on the glass. "I suspect she didn't want to risk her reputation by taking in a woman with no references, no family to vouch for her character." Jake heard what she wasn't saying. In the territories, a woman without protection was assumed to be one kind of woman only, regardless of the truth. "How long since you ate?" She hesitated, pride warring with hunger. "Yesterday, maybe the day before. It's hard to remember." Without a word, Jake stood and headed for the door. Grace watched him go, something like disappointment flickering across her face. But he returned minutes later with a cloth bundle. "Sam's wife makes extra biscuits for me sometimes," he said gruffly, setting the bundle before her. "There's ham, too." Grace's hands shook slightly as she unwrapped the food. She tried to eat slowly, with dignity, but hunger won out. Jake looked away, giving her privacy to satisfy her need. "Why are you helping me?" she asked when she'd finished. Jake considered the question. Why was he? He'd seen plenty of hard luck cases drift through Bitter Creek. He'd never involved himself before. "Maybe because you didn't cry," he said finally. "Most would have." "Tears don't change anything." She wrapped the remaining food carefully. "They just make you look weak." The saloon was filling up as night fell. More eyes turned their way. More whispers started. Jake could feel Grace's discomfort growing. "I should go," she said, standing. "I've imposed enough on your kindness. Where will you go?" She lifted her chin. "I'll find somewhere." Jake knew what that meant. She'd likely try to sleep in an alley or behind one of the buildings, exposed to whatever human or animal predators prowled the night. The temperature would drop 30 degrees once full dark came. In that thin dress, she'd freeze. He made a decision that surprised him. "I've got a cabin about 2 miles north of town. There's a lean-to where you could bed down. It's not much, but it's shelter." Grace's eyes widened. "I couldn't. People would talk." "People are already talking." Jake gestured around the saloon. "At least at my place, you'd have walls and a roof. I'll bed down in the stable with my horse." She searched his face, looking for the catch, the hidden price. Jake met her gaze steadily, letting her see the truth. He wanted nothing from her except to know she'd survive the night. "All right," she said finally, so quietly he almost missed it. They left the saloon together, stepping into the cold embrace of the desert night. Stars emerged like scattered diamonds across the black vault of sky. Jake helped Grace onto his horse, then led the animal on foot through the darkness. Neither spoke during the journey. The only sounds were the horse's hooves on hard-packed earth and the distant yip of coyotes. Grace swayed with exhaustion but didn't complain. The cabin materialized from the darkness, a simple structure of logs and mud chinking. Jake lit a lantern, revealing a sparse interior, a narrow bed, a table, 2 chairs, and a small stove. It wasn't much, but it was clean and solid. "I'll get a fire going," Jake said. "Nights get cold out here." He busied himself with kindling while Grace stood uncertainly by the door. When warmth began to fill the small space, she moved closer to the stove, holding out her hands. "I'll get my bedroll from the stable," Jake said. "There's water in the pitcher if you need it." He was almost to the door when her voice stopped him. "Can I sleep beside you, cowboy?" The words hung in the air like smoke. Jake froze, his hand on the door latch. In the lamplight, Grace stood trembling, whether from cold or fear or something else. He couldn't tell. "I don't mean, I just..." She wrapped her arms around herself. "I haven't felt safe in so long. I promise I won't. I just don't want to be alone. Not tonight." Jake turned slowly. In her eyes, He saw the kind of bone-deep weariness that came from running too far for too long. He recognized it because he saw it in his own reflection every morning. The request had shocked him not because it was improper, though it surely was, but because it echoed something he'd buried deep, the human need for connection, for the simple comfort of another's presence in the darkness. "Ma'am," he said carefully, "that wouldn't be proper. Nothing about my life is proper anymore." Her voice broke slightly. "Please, just tonight. I'll leave in the morning and never trouble you again." Jake stood frozen in the doorway, caught between the man he'd forced himself to become and the man he'd once been. Before the war, before the losses that had driven him to this lonely existence. The silence stretched between them, filled with unspoken understanding of what it meant to be so alone that even the presence of a stranger felt like salvation. Jake stood motionless, her words echoing in his mind like the reverberation of a struck bell. The simple question had shattered something inside him, a wall he'd built brick by brick over years of solitary existence. His throat constricted, and for a moment, he couldn't find his voice. "Ma'am, He cleared his throat, trying again. "Grace, you don't know what you're asking. I'm asking for human kindness," she said softly. Nothing more. The wind picked up outside, rattling the wooden shutters. The sound seemed to break Jake from his paralysis. He closed the door slowly, his movements careful and deliberate, as if sudden motion might shatter the fragile moment. "I'll make up a pallet on the floor," he said finally, "near the stove. You take the bed." "That's not what It's the best I can offer while keeping your reputation intact." His voice was rougher than he intended. "What's left of it, anyway?" Grace's shoulders sagged slightly, but she nodded. Jake busied himself pulling blankets from a trunk, spreading them on the hard floor. The silence between them grew heavy, punctuated only by the crackling of the fire and the distant howl of wind across the plains. "There's a nightshirt in the drawer," Jake said without looking at her. "It'll be too big, but it's clean." He heard the rustle of fabric, the soft sounds of her changing behind the makeshift curtain of a hanging blanket. When she emerged, the oversized shirt hanging to her knees, she looked younger, more vulnerable. Jake turned away quickly, focusing on banking the fire for the night. "Jake?" He grunted acknowledgement without turning. "Why do you live out here alone?" The question hung between them. Jake considered not answering, but something about the darkness and her presence loosened his tongue. "A man does things in war," he said slowly. "Things that change him. Sometimes it's better to keep that kind of changed man away from decent folk." "What things?" Jake's hand stilled on the poker. "Things that visit him at night, things that make him wake up swinging, thinking he's back there." Grace moved closer, her bare feet silent on the wooden floor. "Is that how you got the scar?" "No." He touched the mark unconsciously. "That came from trying to protect people who didn't want protecting. Lot like tonight, come to think of it." A ghost of a smile touched her lips. "But you did it anyway. Fool habit I can't seem to break." Grace settled onto the bed, pulling the thick blanket up to her chin. Jake arranged his own blankets on the floor, his back to her. The fire dimmed to glowing embers, casting shifting shadows on the walls. "I had a husband once," Grace said into the darkness. "Henry Porter. Everybody said he was a good man. Owned a store back in Independence." Jake remained silent, sensing she needed to speak more than she needed responses. "He was 20 years older. My father owed him money, so—" She trailed off. "It was a business arrangement. Really, Henry got a young wife to mind his house and give him children. My father got his debts cleared." The wind moaned through the chinks in the walls. Jake pulled his blanket tighter. He wasn't cruel, exactly, just cold, calculating. Everything was a transaction with Henry, even the marriage bed. Her voice dropped to barely above a whisper. "When he died of fever last year, I thought I was free. Then his brother Samuel came to settle the estate." Jake's body tensed. He'd heard variations of this story before. They rarely ended well. Samuel said Henry had debts, said the only way to pay them was if I married him. combined the assets. When I refused, she drew a shaky breath. He said he'd make sure everyone knew I'd driven Henry to ruin with my wasteful ways. Said no decent man would have me, but he was willing to overlook my faults out of family loyalty. So you ran. In the dead of night, with nothing but the clothes on my back and what little money I could hide away. I've been running for 3 months. Her voice grew stronger. I'd rather starve free than live in another cage. Jake rolled onto his back, staring at the rough-hewn beams above. Takes courage to choose uncertainty over security, or foolishness. Maybe they're the same thing sometimes. They lapsed into silence. Jake could hear Grace's breathing gradually slow and deepen. He thought she'd fallen asleep when she spoke again. I'm sorry for asking. What I asked, it wasn't proper. Nothing wrong with not wanting to be alone. Jake said quietly, we're not made for it, no matter how hard we try to convince ourselves otherwise. Then why do you live out here by yourself? Jake considered the question. Because the alternative is worse. What could be worse than this loneliness? Hurting someone you care about because you can't control what the war left inside you. Grace was quiet for so long, Jake thought the conversation was over. Then he heard the soft pad of feet on floor. She stood beside his pallet, her face obscured by darkness. I'm not afraid of you, Jake Sullivan. You should be, but I'm not. She knelt beside him, her hand finding his in the darkness. When you stood up to those men, I saw something in your eyes. Not cruelty or violence for its own sake, just protection, like you'd drawn a line and wouldn't let them cross it. Jake's hand remained still beneath hers, neither pulling away nor responding. Grace, please, go back to bed. I've spent months sleeping with one eye open, she whispered, jumping at every sound, every shadow. Tonight, for the first time, I feel safe. Is it so wrong to want to stay close to that feeling? Jake sat up slowly, gently extracting his hand. It's not about right or wrong. It's about what happens tomorrow when the sun comes up and the world judges us both. Let them judge. There was defiance in her voice now. They judge me already for being a woman alone, for refusing to be sold again like livestock. What's one more mark against my name? It's not your name I'm worried about. Grace tilted her head. You care what people think? No, I care what I might do, what I might want. The admission seemed torn from him. You're asking a man who's lived alone for 5 years to suddenly share his space, his air, his... He stopped abruptly. Your what? Nothing. Go back to bed. Grace, please. Instead, she settled beside him on the floor, maintaining a careful distance but close enough that he could feel the warmth of her presence. I'll stay here then, on my own blanket, just near. Jake knew he should insist, should physically carry her back to the bed if necessary, but something in him, that long-buried need for human connection, refused to act. He lay back down, acutely aware of every breath she took, every small movement. Tell me about before, Grace said softly. Before the war. Who were you? Nobody special. Son of a school teacher and a pastor. Can you imagine? A bitter laugh escaped him. Thought I'd follow in my father's footsteps, save souls instead of taking lives. What changed? Fort Sumter, duty, foolish notions about glory and honor. He stared at the embers of the dying fire. Joined up with the 1st Missouri. Thought the war would be over by Christmas. Everybody did. But it wasn't. No, it ground on and on, each battle worse than the last. Shiloh, Stones River, Chickamauga. The names fell like lead weights. By the end, I'd killed so many men I lost count. Boys. Really, some no older than 16. Grace's hand found his again in the darkness. This time, he didn't pull away. The last one was at Franklin. He continued, his voice hollow. November 1864. Bloodiest 5 hours I ever saw. We were dug in behind earthworks when the Confederates charged, wave after wave of them, walking into our fire like it was summer rain. This one boy couldn't have been more than 17. Made it all the way to our line. I shot him point blank. He looked surprised more than anything. Called for his mama as he died. Jake's hand trembled in hers. That's when something broke in me. After the war, I tried going home, but I'd see that boy's face in every young man I met. Started waking up swinging. Nearly hurt my sister's husband when he tried to wake me from a nightmare. So I left. Came out here where I couldn't hurt anyone. You're not that man anymore, Grace said gently. Aren't I? You saw how those men backed down tonight. They recognized what I am. A killer. I saw a man who protects those who can't protect themselves. Same skill set, different application. Grace shifted closer, her shoulder barely touching his. Maybe, or maybe you're punishing yourself for being human in inhuman circumstances. They lay in silence as the fire died to ash. Outside, a screech owl called, its cry lonesome in the vast darkness. Jake felt the warmth of Grace beside him, simultaneously comforting and terrifying. How long since he'd allowed another person this close? I'll be gone in the morning, Grace whispered. I promise, but tonight, thank you for letting me stay. Jake turned his head to look at her. In the faint moonlight through the window, he could see her profile, the straight nose, the determined chin, the curve of her lips. Where will you go? West, California, maybe somewhere I can start fresh. It's dangerous territory between here and there. Apache raids, outlaws, desert, still better than going back. Jake made a decision that surprised him. There's work here if you want it. My neighbor, Tom Martinez, his wife died last spring. He's got 3 young ones and no one to help. It's not much, but it's honest work. People would talk if I stayed. About us. Let them. Grace turned to face him fully. Even in the darkness, he could feel the intensity of her gaze. Why do you care what happens to me? Jake was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. When he spoke, his voice was barely audible. Because you remind me that not everything in this world is broken, that some things are still worth protecting. Without thinking, Grace leaned forward and pressed her lips gently to his scarred cheek. Jake went rigid, then slowly, carefully, put his arms around her. They held each other in the darkness, 2 damaged souls finding a moment's peace in shared warmth. When sleep finally took them, they were still intertwined, the careful distance forgotten. For the first time in 5 years, Jake Sullivan slept without nightmares, and for the first time in months, Grace Porter slept without fear. The wind continued its lonely howl across the prairie, but inside the small cabin, 2 hearts beat in quiet synchronization, holding the darkness at bay. Dawn broke pale and unforgiving across the prairie, its light creeping through the cabin's single window like an unwelcome visitor. Jake woke first, momentarily disoriented by the warm weight against his shoulder. Grace had curled into him during the night, her head tucked beneath his chin, one hand fisted in his shirt. For a heartbeat, he allowed himself the dangerous luxury of stillness, breathing in the faint scent of her hair. Then reality crashed back. He carefully extracted himself, replacing his warmth with a folded blanket. Grace stirred but didn't wake. In the growing light, he could see the exhaustion etched in her features, the vulnerability sleep brought to her face. Jake pulled on his boots and slipped outside. The morning air bit sharp and clean. He drew water from the well, splashed his face, trying to wash away the memory of her closeness. What had he been thinking? He'd lived alone precisely to avoid such complications. When he returned, Grace was awake, sitting on the edge of the bed with his shirt wrapped tight around her. Her hair fell loose around her shoulders, and she was attempting to pin it back with trembling fingers. "Morning," he said gruffly, setting the water bucket by the stove. "I should go." She wouldn't meet his eyes. "I've imposed enough. Coffee first, and breakfast." Jake busied himself with the stove, grateful for something to do with his hands. "That work I mentioned, it's real. Tom Martinez is a good man. He'll treat you fair. People will assume things about us. They assume things anyway." Jake set a cup of coffee before her. Might as well eat regular while they're doing it. Grace wrapped her hands around the tin cup, seeking its warmth. Why are you doing this? Maybe I'm tired of eating my own cooking. The attempted levity fell flat. Jake sighed. Look, you need work. Tom needs help. Simple as that. Nothing's ever simple. No, he agreed. But sometimes we pretend it is long enough to get by. They ate in silence, beans and biscuits. Simple fare that seemed like a feast to Grace. Jake watched her try to maintain proper manners despite her hunger. When they finished, he cleared his throat. I'll ride into town, talk to Tom. You stay here, rest up. There's a creek out back if you want to wash. Grace nodded, then caught his sleeve as he turned to go. Jake, last night. Nothing happened last night that needs discussing. His voice was gentle but firm. Two tired souls shared some warmth against the cold. Nothing more. Something flickered in her eyes. Disappointment. Relief. Before Jake could decipher it, she nodded and released him. The ride to town had never seemed longer. Jake's mind churned with each hoofbeat. What was he doing? He'd built his solitary life carefully, deliberately. Now this woman had appeared and suddenly he was making plans, offering solutions, caring what happened next. Bitter Creek was already stirring as he rode down Main Street. Women swept boardwalks, merchants opened shops, and the daily commerce of frontier life resumed. But Jake noticed the looks, sharp, speculative glances that followed his progress. News traveled fast in a small town. He found Tom Martinez at the livery, checking his wagon's axle. A compact man with sun-weathered features and kind eyes. Tom straightened as Jake approached. Jake, heard you had some excitement at the Broken Wheel last night. News travels like wildfire. Tom's expression grew serious. Also heard you left with that woman, the one traveling alone. Jake met his gaze steadily. She needed help. I'm sure she did. Tom wiped his hands on a rag. Look, Jake, I'm not one to judge. Lord knows you've kept to yourself and minded your business better than most. But people are talking. Let them talk. I came to ask about work. You still need help with the children? Tom's eyebrows rose. For her? She's educated, from back east, knows her letters and numbers. Your children need schooling. Maria's barely been gone 6 months. Jake, I'm not looking to replace. Not talking about replacing. Talking about help, someone to teach the little ones. Keep house while you work. Proper arrangement. Proper wages. Tom studied him. You vouch for her? I do. You know her well enough for that? After one night, Jake's jaw tightened. I know she's running from something, but not the law. I know she's got pride enough to near starve rather than take charity. And I know she stood up to Bill Hutchins and his boys with more backbone than most men would show. That enough? Tom was quiet for a long moment. Then he nodded. Bring her by this afternoon. I'll talk to her, see if it might work. But Jake, he paused. If this brings trouble to my door, to my children, it won't. You sound mighty sure for a man who met her yesterday. Jake had no answer for that. He touched his hat brim and turned to go. But Tom's voice stopped him. Jake, be careful. A woman running from something sometimes means that something follows. The warning echoed in Jake's mind as he made his way through town. At the general store, he picked up supplies, flour, salt pork, coffee, Mrs. Henderson, the proprietor's wife, took his money with pursed lips and obvious disapproval. Heard you had a visitor last night, she said, not quite meeting his eyes. Jake said nothing, pocketing his change. A decent woman wouldn't be traveling alone, wouldn't be drinking in saloons with strange men. Good thing I'm not a decent man, then. Jake gathered his purchases. We match. Mrs. Henderson's face flushed. Well, I never... No, ma'am, I don't suppose you have. Jake touched his hat. Good day. Outside, he nearly collided with Sheriff Ben Carter. The lawman steadied him with one hand, his star glinting in the morning sun. Jake was hoping to run into you. Sheriff, about last night, Bill Hutchins is making noise about you pulling iron on him. My hand never touched my gun. I know. Several witnesses confirm that. Carter shifted his weight. But Bill's got cousins. The Hutchins boys don't take kindly to being shown up, especially by... He stopped. By a killer like me? Carter had the grace to look uncomfortable. By anyone. Just watch your back, and maybe encourage your house guest to move on sooner rather than later. For everyone's sake. Jake's voice turned cold. That sounds like a threat. Sheriff, it's advice. Nothing more. I like you. Jake, you keep to yourself. Don't cause trouble. But that woman, she's already bringing complications. First night in town and there's near violence in the saloon. What happens after a week? A month? Maybe the problem isn't her. Maybe it's men who think a woman alone is fair game. Maybe so. But the world is what it is. Not what we'd like it to be. Carter adjusted his hat. I'll do my job. Keep the peace best I can. But I can't be everywhere. Jake climbed onto his horse without responding. As he rode out, he noticed more stares, more whispered conversations behind hands. The town that had largely ignored him for 5 years suddenly found him fascinating. When he reached the cabin, he found Grace by the creek, her hair damp from washing. She'd cleaned her dress as best she could and tidied the cabin. Something twisted in his chest at the small signs of domestic presence. A wildflower and a tin cup on the table, the blankets folded neatly, his few dishes washed and arranged. You didn't have to do that, he said. I needed to feel useful. She studied his face. What happened in town? Tom will see you this afternoon. He's a good man, fair. His children need teaching. And the rest, I can see it in your eyes. Jake, what did people say? Jake set down the supplies. Nothing worth repeating. About me, about us. It wasn't a question. Grace, I told you I should leave. I'm bringing you trouble just by being here. I've handled worse trouble than small-town gossip. Have you? She moved closer. When's the last time you cared what anyone thought? When's the last time you had something to lose? The question hit harder than she probably intended. Jake turned away, busying himself with storing the supplies. Get your things together. We'll ride to the Martinez place afternoon. Jake, I'm trying to protect you too. He laughed, short and bitter. I don't need protecting. Everyone needs protecting from something. They prepared for the trip in strained silence. Grace wore her traveling dress, now clean but still showing wear. Jake noticed her trying to smooth the wrinkles, to pin her hair more severely. You look fine, he said quietly. I look like what I am. A woman with no home, no family, no prospects except charity from strangers. It's not charity. It's work, honest work. Arranged by you, vouched for by you. She met his eyes. Your reputation is all tangled up with mine now, whether you admit it or not. Jake didn't answer because she was right. In a single night, she'd become his responsibility in the eyes of the town. Everything she did would reflect on him. It should have angered him, this sudden weight of connection. Instead, he found himself oddly protective of it. The Martinez Ranch sat 3 miles from town, a modest but well-kept spread with a small house and several outbuildings. Children's voices carried on the wind, laughter mixed with Spanish and English. As they approached, 3 small faces appeared at the window. Tom emerged from the barn, wiping his hands. His expression was carefully neutral as he helped Grace dismount. Ma'am, I'm Tom Martinez. Grace Porter? She stood straight despite her obvious nervousness. Mister, Sullivan says you need help with your children. I need help with many things, Tom admitted. My Maria. She did it all. The house, the children. Even helped with the stock when needed. I'm not looking to replace her. You understand. No one could. But the children. His voice roughened. They need more than I can give alone. How old are they? Rosa is 8. Miguel's 6. Little Anna just turned 4. Tom glanced at the house where 3 pairs of eyes still watched. They're good children, but they miss their mama something fierce. I understand loss, Grace said simply. I won't try to replace her, but I can teach them, care for them, help them remember her while still moving forward. Tom studied her for a long moment, then nodded. Let's go inside. Meet them proper. As they walked toward the house, Jake caught Tom's arm. I'll be back to check on things. No need. If I take her on, she's under my protection. Tom's meaning was clear. Jake's involvement would only complicate matters. But Grace turned back. Thank you, she said softly. For everything. Jake touched his hat. Throat tight, he mounted his horse and rode away without looking back, though he could feel her eyes on him until the distance swallowed the ranch from view. That night, alone in his cabin that suddenly seemed too empty, Jake stared at the spot where she'd slept beside him. The wildflower still sat in its tin cup, already beginning to wilt. He should throw it out, erase this small sign of her presence. Instead, he added water to the cup and set it back on the table. Then he lay down on his narrow bed that smelled faintly of her hair and stared at the ceiling, wondering how one night could change the careful structure of his solitary existence. In town, he knew the gossip would be spreading like wildfire. The hermit Jake Sullivan and the mysterious woman, the killer and the runaway. By morning, the story would have grown, twisted, taken on a life of its own. For the first time in 5 years, Jake found he didn't care. 3 weeks passed in relative quiet. Jake returned to his solitary routine, though he found himself riding past the Martinez ranch more often than necessary. Through glimpses and Tom's occasional comments in town, he learned that Grace had settled in well. The children had taken to her, especially little Anna, who followed her everywhere like a shadow. Jake told himself he was satisfied with this arrangement. Grace was safe, employed, respectable. He could return to his isolation with a clear conscience. Yet, each night, he found himself staring at that same spot on the floor, remembering the weight of her against his shoulder. The peace shattered on a Tuesday afternoon that started like any other. Jake was repairing his fence when the sound of galloping horses made him look up. A dust cloud rose from the direction of town, moving fast, too fast for normal travel. He strapped on his gun belt and waited. Sheriff Carter crested the hill first, followed by Tom Martinez and several other men Jake recognized as townspeople. Their faces told him everything he needed to know. Trouble had come to Bitter Creek. "Jake," Carter called out, reining in hard. "The Hutchins gang hit town an hour ago. They're holed up in the Broken Wheel, demanding protection money from every business. That's your problem, Sheriff, not mine. They asked for you specifically." Tom's face was grim. "Said they had unfinished business with the man who humiliated Bill." Jake felt the old familiar coldness settle into his bones. "How many?" "7, maybe 8. Bill and his cousins, plus some hired guns they picked up." Carter removed his hat, wiped sweat from his brow. "Jake, I've got to ask. Will you help? I've only got one deputy, and he's green as spring grass. I'm not a lawman. No, but you're the only man in 50 miles who's faced down odds like these and lived." Carter's voice dropped. "They're threatening to burn businesses if people don't pay. Mrs. Henderson's already handed over her cash box. The bank's next." Jake was already moving toward his horse when Tom spoke again. "Jake, there's something else. They were asking about Grace, where she was staying, who she was working for." The coldness in Jake's bones turned to ice. "When?" "Right before we rode out here. I left my foreman and some hands to watch the ranch, but—" Jake didn't wait to hear the rest. He saddled his horse with swift, economical movements, checking his rifle and the rounds in his Colt. The other men watched silently, recognizing the transformation. The hermit was gone. In his place stood the soldier, the killer they'd all heard whispers about. "Stay behind me," Jake said as he mounted. "Don't get in my way, and don't try to be heroes. Sheriff, your job is to get the innocent folks clear. I'll handle the Hutchins boys." They rode hard for town, the horses' hooves thundering across the dry earth. Jake's mind had gone to that cold, clear place it always found before battle. He cataloged what he knew: numbers, positions, weapons. The broken wheel had 2 entrances, front and back, windows on 3 sides, a second-floor balcony that overlooked Main Street. But underneath the tactical assessment, another thought pounded with his heartbeat. Grace? They were asking about Grace. Bitter Creek appeared deserted as they approached. Shutters were closed, streets empty except for a few horses tied outside the saloon. Jake could see shapes moving behind the broken wheel's windows. A rifle barrel glinted from the second floor. "They've got a man upstairs," Jake said quietly. "Probably another at the back door. The rest will be inside, using the bar as cover." Carter nodded. "How do you want to play this?" I'm going to walk in the front door and give Bill Hutchins one chance to leave town breathing." Jake dismounted, handed his rifle to Tom. "If shooting starts, get everyone to cover. This won't take long." "Jake, that's suicide," Tom protested. 7 guns against 1? 8, Jake corrected. "And I've faced worse odds." He checked his Colt one last time. "Sheriff, if I don't walk out, you'll find papers in my cabin. Everything goes to Tom for Grace and the children." Before anyone could respond, Jake strode across the street. His spurs rang against the boardwalk, a metallic countdown to violence. At the saloon doors, he paused, listening. Voices inside, laughter, the clink of bottles. They were confident, relaxed. That would be their first mistake. Jake pushed through the doors. The laughter died instantly. 8 men were scattered around the saloon, 3 at the bar, 2 at tables, 1 by the back door, 1 on the stairs to the second floor. Bill Hutchins stood center stage, a whiskey bottle in one hand, pistol in the other. His face split into an ugly grin. Well, the hermit comes to town. Boys, meet Jake Sullivan, the man who thinks he's too good to drink with regular folks. I'm giving you one chance." "Bill," Jake said quietly, "take your boys and ride out. Don't come back." "Or what?" Bill took a swig from the bottle. "You'll glare at us some more? Maybe say something mysterious and walk away like last time?" "Last time, a lady was present. I showed restraint." Jake's hands hung loose at his sides. "I'm not feeling restrained today." One of the gunmen laughed nervously. 8 against 1. Sullivan, even you ain't that good." "You're right," Jake agreed. "It's not fair odds. Some of you should leave." The laughter was more uncertain now. Something in Jake's absolute calm, his matter-of-fact tone, sent warnings through men who lived by reading danger. Bill's face reddened. "You arrogant." He raised his pistol. Jake moved. To the witnesses who survived, what happened next would become legend, told and retold until it grew beyond truth into myth. But in the moment, it was simply violence at its most efficient. Jake's Colt cleared leather before Bill's gun was halfway up. The first shot took Bill in the shoulder, spinning him around. Jake was already moving, diving left as bullets filled the air where he'd stood. His second shot dropped the man on the stairs. The third took the gunman by the back door. Jake rolled behind an overturned table as splinters exploded around him. He counted muzzle flashes, tracked positions by sound. A man broke cover, trying to flank him. Jake's 4th shot caught him center mass. Another tried to flee out the back. The 5th bullet found him. Silence fell, broken only by groaning and the tinkle of falling glass. Jake rose slowly. Gun trained on the remaining men. 3 were down, not moving. 2 others had thrown away their weapons, hands high. Bill Hutchins writhed on the floor, clutching his shoulder. The whole fight had lasted less than 30 seconds. "Anyone else?" Jake's voice was conversationally calm. "No, good." He looked at the 2 standing. "Get your wounded and get out. If I see any of you in Bitter Creek again, we won't have another conversation." The Batwing doors burst open. Sheriff Carter and the others rushed in, guns drawn, then stopped at the scene before them. Jake was already reloading, his movements unhurried. "Tom," Jake said without looking up, "might want to check your ranch." Tom's face went white. He turned and ran. Jake followed at a more measured pace, but inside, urgency clawed at him. The questions about Grace hadn't been idle curiosity. The Hutchins gang had come for more than protection money. They found Tom's foreman tied up in the barn, blood running from a gash on his head. The house stood ominously quiet. Jake's heart hammered as he pushed through the door. Gun ready. The main room was in chaos, furniture overturned, books scattered, clear signs of a struggle, but no blood. Thank God, no blood. Grace! Tom's voice cracked as he searched. Children! A muffled sound from the root cellar. Jake yanked open the door to find Rosa. Miguel and Anna huddled together, tear-stained but unharmed. Rosa clutched a piece of paper. Miss Grace told us to hide, the girl whispered. Said to give this to Mr. Jake if he came. Jake took the paper with trembling hands. Grace's neat handwriting, hastily scrawled. They took me. Said it was your fault for interfering. Don't come after me. Take care of the children. Gee! The ice in Jake's veins turned to fire. He crumpled the note. Jaw clenched so tight his teeth ached. Behind him, Tom gathered his children, murmuring soothing words in Spanish. How long ago? Jake asked Rosa. Not long, maybe when the sun was there. She pointed to a spot that suggested less than an hour's head start. On horseback, moving fast, but they had grace, which would slow them, and Jake knew this country like his own scars. Jake, Sheriff Carter had arrived, breathing hard. We can form a posse, get fresh horses, supplies. No time. Jake was already moving. They'll kill her if they see a posse coming. This needs to be done quiet. You can't take on what's left of them alone, not in open country. Jake turned, and Carter stepped back at what he saw in his eyes. Watch me. He gathered what he needed quickly. Rifle, ammunition, water, rope. His movements were precise, automatic. The soldier preparing for war. At the door, Tom caught his arm. Bring her back, Tom said simply. Whatever it takes. Jake nodded once and was gone. The trail wasn't hard to find. 5 horses moving fast but not carefully. They were heading northwest, toward the Badlands where 100 canyons could hide a man forever. But Jake had tracked Apache raiders through worse terrain. These men were amateurs in comparison. He pushed his horse hard but smart, reading the signs. Here, where they'd stopped to water. There, where one rider had dismounted, checking their back trail, maybe, or shifting Grace to a different horse. No blood on the ground. She was still alive. The sun peaked and began its descent. Jake's world narrowed to the trail. The next ridge, the growing certainty that he was gaining on them. His shoulder ached, an old wound complaining, but he ignored it. Nothing mattered except the ground disappearing beneath his horse's hooves. As shadows lengthened, he saw them. 5 riders silhouetted against the sky, picking their way down a steep trail into a canyon. A flash of green, Grace's dress. She was on the lead horse, hands apparently tied to the saddle horn. Jake dismounted, ground tying his horse. Time to do what he did best. He worked his way along the rim, silent as the Apache who'd taught him. The gang was making camp by a small spring, confident they'd lost any pursuit. Jake counted carefully. 4 men. Bill must have succumbed to his wound or been left behind. Grace sat apart, still tied, even from a distance. Jake could see the defiant set of her shoulders. One of the men approached her, saying something that made the others laugh. Grace's response was to spit at his feet. The man raised his hand to strike her. Jake's rifle spoke from the shadows. The man spun and fell. Before the echo died, Jake had shifted position, firing again. Another man down. The remaining 2 scrambled for cover, shooting wildly at the canyon walls. "Sullivan!" one shouted. "We know it's you. Show yourself or we kill the woman." Jake circled silently, using every shadow, every fold of rock. These men were terrified now, firing at ghosts. One made the mistake of rising to relocate. Jake's pistol barked twice. The man stumbled, fell still. The last gunman panicked, breaking from cover to run for the horses. Jake let him get 3 steps before the final shot dropped him. Silence settled over the canyon like a shroud. Jake waited, counting heartbeats, before emerging from the shadows. He moved through the camp methodically, checking bodies, kicking weapons away. Only when he was certain did he approach Grace. She looked up at him with eyes that held too many emotions to name. "I told you not to come. Never been good at following orders." Jake cut her bonds with gentle hands, noting the raw marks on her wrists. "You hurt?" "No, they wanted me alive." "Said I was bait." She rubbed feeling back into her hands. "Jake, I'm sorry. I brought this on everyone." "Stop." He helped her stand, steadying her when she swayed. "None of this is your fault." "Isn't it? If I hadn't come to Bitter Creek, hadn't asked to stay with you that night, then you'd probably be dead in some alley, and the Hutchins boys would have found another excuse to cause trouble." Jake retrieved a canteen, handed it to her. "Evil men don't need reasons. Grace, they just need opportunities." She drank deeply, then looked around the camp at the still bodies. "You killed them all." "Yes." "For me?" Jake met her gaze steadily. "Yes." Something shifted in her expression. Without warning, she pressed herself against him, her arms wrapping around his waist. Jake stood frozen for a moment, then slowly embraced her, one hand cradling the back of her head. "I was so scared," she whispered against his chest. "Not of dying, of never seeing you again, of never telling you." "Grace," his voice was rough. "Don't. We need to get back. Tom and the children are worried." She pulled back to look at him. "That's all? We just go back and pretend nothing's changed." "Everything's changed." Jake's thumb brushed a smudge of dirt from her cheek. "But we need to get somewhere safe before we figure out what that means." As they prepared to leave, Grace caught his hand. "Jake, what you did today, what you became, does it frighten you?" He considered the question, looking at the evidence of violence surrounding them. "No. What frightens me is how easy it was, how natural." He met her eyes. "What frightens me is that I'd do it again in a heartbeat to keep you safe." "Maybe that's not something to fear," Grace said quietly. "Maybe that's just love looking like what it needs to in a hard world." Jake had no answer for that. He helped her mount up, and they rode out of the canyon as stars began to pierce the darkening sky. Behind them, the night creatures would soon come to clean up what remained. By morning, it would be as if the violence had never happened. But Jake knew better. Violence always left marks, visible or not. The question was whether those marks would define you or whether you could build something good in spite of them. As they rode through the darkness toward town, Grace's hand found his across the gap between their horses. Jake held on, feeling something fundamental shift inside him. For 5 years, he'd hidden from the world, from connection, from the possibility of caring enough to kill again. Now he'd killed again. But this time, it hadn't been about war or duty or orders. It had been about protecting something precious, someone precious. Maybe Grace was right. Maybe that was what love looked like in a hard world. Maybe a man who'd been broken by violence could still build something worth defending. The lights of Bitter Creek appeared in the distance, and Jake squeezed Grace's hand. Maybe it was time to stop running from what he was and start fighting for what he could become. The return to Bitter Creek should have been triumphant. Jake had saved Grace, eliminated the Hutchins gang, and protected the town. Instead, they were met with a wall of stony faces and whispered accusations. Women pulled their children inside as they passed. Men watched from doorways with expressions caught between gratitude and fear. At the Martinez Ranch, Tom ran out to meet them, his relief palpable as he helped Grace dismount. The children pressed against her skirts, little Anna crying into the green fabric, but even Tom's welcome couldn't mask the worry in his eyes. "Thank God you're safe," he said to Grace, then turned to Jake. "Sheriff Carter wants to see you. There's been talk." Jake had expected this. "I'll go directly." "Jake," Grace caught his arm. "I'm going with you." "No. You've been through enough. Stay here. Rest." Her chin lifted in that stubborn way he'd come to recognize. "This concerns me too. I won't hide while you face consequences for saving my life." They found Sheriff Carter at his office, along with Mayor Aldrich, Reverend Mills, and several prominent townsmen. The atmosphere was thick with tension. "Jake," Carter's voice was carefully neutral. "We need to discuss what happened today." What's to discuss? The Hutchins gang is gone. The town is safe. Mayor Aldrich, a portly man who'd made his fortune in cattle, cleared his throat. 8 men dead in one day. Sullivan, that's not law and order. That's a massacre. Those men were killers and thieves. Grace interjected. They kidnapped me, threatened children. Ma'am, with respect, you're not helping. Reverend Mills, thin and severe in his black coat, fixed her with a disapproving stare. Your association with Mr. Sullivan has brought nothing but violence to our community. My association? Grace's voice rose. I was kidnapped because violent men wanted revenge. How is that my fault? A proper woman wouldn't have been in a position to be kidnapped. Mrs. Henderson said from the doorway, apparently unable to resist joining the impromptu trial, staying overnight with a man, working without proper supervision. That's enough. Jake's quiet words cut through the growing clamor. You want someone to blame? Blame me. I killed those men. I'd do it again, but leave Miss Porter out of it. Mayor Aldrich leaned forward. That's precisely the problem. Sullivan, your willingness to kill. We're trying to build a civilized town here, attract families and businesses. We can't have gunfights in our streets. Men shot down like dogs. You preferred it when they were extorting your businesses. Jake's voice carried an edge. When they were threatening to burn you out, I didn't see this committee forming when you were begging me to help. We asked for help, not a bloodbath. Reverend Mills said, there are Christian ways to resolve conflicts. Tell that to the Hutchins gang. Jake stood. I'm done here. You want me gone? Fine. I'll be out of the territory by week's end. Jake, no. Grace stood with him. If he goes, I go too. The room erupted, everyone talking at once, voices raised in argument. Through it all, Jake watched Grace, saw the determination in her eyes, the way she planted herself beside him like she was ready to take on the whole town. Sheriff Carter's whistle pierced the chaos. Enough. Everybody calm down. He looked tired, older than his 40 years. Nobody's asking anyone to leave. Jake, you did what needed doing, but folks are scared. First the saloon, then the kidnapping, now this. They see you two together and they see trouble. We are together, Grace said quietly, and Jake's heart stumbled. Not in the way you're all thinking with your small minds and smaller hearts. But yes, we're connected. I won't pretend otherwise to satisfy your need for propriety. Mrs. Henderson gasped. The scandal? What scandal? Grace's voice grew stronger. That a man protected a woman in danger, that 2 lonely people found comfort in friendship. The only scandal I see is how quick you all are to judge what you don't understand. Miss Porter. Mayor Aldrich's tone was patronizing. You're overwrought. Perhaps you should... Perhaps I should what? Go back to pretending? Play the grateful servant, eyes downcast, knowing my place? Grace laughed bitterly. I fled one prison of others' expectations. I won't build another here. Jake touched her elbow gently. Grace, enough. Let's go. But she wasn't finished. You want to know the truth? Yes. I stayed with Jake that first night, on the floor, fully clothed, because I was terrified and alone, and he was the first person in months to show me genuine kindness. Yes, we've grown to care for each other. And yes, I'd rather be cast out with him than accepted by hypocrites who value appearance over truth. The silence that followed was deafening. Then Tom Martinez spoke from the doorway where he'd been listening. Seems to me, he said slowly, that Jake Sullivan saved this town today. Saved Miss Grace. Saved my children from losing someone else they care about. If that's not Christian behavior, Reverend, then maybe I've been reading the wrong Bible. Tom, the Reverend began. But Tom wasn't finished. My Maria's gone. My children were learning to smile again because of Miss Grace. You want to drive them out? Fine, but you'll lose the best teacher those young ones could have. And you'll lose the only man in 50 miles who'd stand between this town and the next gang that rides through. Others began to speak up. The blacksmith mentioned how Jake had helped repair his roof last winter, asking nothing in return. The Mexican families talked about how he'd always treated them fair, unlike some in town. Even Sam from the saloon admitted Jake had never caused trouble until others brought it to him. Mayor Aldrich raised his hands. Nobody's talking about driving anyone out. We need assurances that the violence is over, that Miss Porter's presence won't attract more trouble. I can't promise that, Grace said. I'm still a woman alone in the world. That seems to offend some people merely by existing, but I can promise I'll do nothing to deliberately bring harm to this town or its people. And you, Sullivan, Sheriff Carter asked, can you go back to being the quiet man who keeps to himself? Jake looked at Grace, then around the room. No, I can't. He felt her hand slip into his, small but strong. I spent 5 years hiding from the world. That ended when Miss Porter asked for my help. I won't pretend otherwise. So what are you saying? The mayor looked confused. I'm saying I'm done living like a ghost. If trouble comes, I'll face it. If the town needs protecting, I'll protect it. But I won't apologize for who I am or who I choose to stand beside. Reverend Mills stood, his face pinched with disapproval. This is highly irregular. Unmarried persons shouldn't. Then marry us. The words hung in the air. Jake wasn't sure who was more surprised, the crowd or himself. Beside him, Grace's hand tightened on his. What? The Reverend blinked rapidly. You're concerned about propriety, about appearances. Jake turned to Grace, his voice softening. I'm not good with words. Grace, I'm broken in ways that might never heal, but I know I'd rather face the world with you than hide from it alone, if you'll have me. Grace's eyes filled with tears. Jake Sullivan, is that a proposal? It's a poor one. You deserve better. Flowers and pretty speeches and... She silenced him by pressing her fingers to his lips. Yes. The room exploded again, but Jake heard none of it. He was lost in Grace's eyes, in the wonder of her acceptance, this woman who'd seen him at his most violent, who knew the darkness he carried, still said yes. Sheriff Carter cleared his throat loudly. Well then, seems we have a solution. Reverend, I believe you have a wedding to prepare. This is highly irregular, Mills repeated weakly. So is life out here, Tom said with a grin. I'll stand as witness for Jake, and I for Grace. His daughter Rosa piped up, then blushed. If that's allowed. Grace knelt to hug the girl. I'd be honored. The crowd began to disperse, some grumbling, others already planning the event. Mrs. Henderson couldn't resist a parting shot. It's not proper, marrying in haste like this. People will talk. Let them, Grace said. They've done nothing but talk since I arrived. At least now they'll have something true to discuss. As the office emptied, Jake and Grace found themselves alone with Sheriff Carter. The lawman studied them both, then smiled. For what it's worth, he said. I think you're good for each other. Jake, you've been among the living dead since you arrived here. And Grace, you've got more spine than half the men in this town. Maybe together you'll find some peace. Outside, the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose. Jake and Grace walked slowly back toward the Martinez ranch, hands linked. Did you mean it? Grace asked quietly. Or were you just trying to solve their problem? Jake stopped, turned her to face him. I've never said anything I meant more, but Grace, you need to understand what you're agreeing to. I have nightmares. Sometimes I wake up fighting. I'm not easy to live with. Neither am I. She interrupted. I'm stubborn and proud, and I've been told I have an unwomanly need to speak my mind. I've noticed. A smile tugged at his lips. I like it. And I like that you're willing to fight for what matters, that you don't hide behind pretty words when action is needed. She reached up to touch his scarred cheek. We're both damaged. Jake. Maybe that means we'll understand each other better than whole people could. They resumed walking as the first stars appeared. Tom's ranch glowed warmly in the distance, children's laughter carrying on the evening air. When? Grace asked. Soon as the Reverend will do it. Tomorrow, if possible. Jake squeezed her hand. I've wasted enough time hiding. I don't want to waste any more. Your cabin is small for 2 people. We'll build on, or build new. He glanced at her. Maybe closer to town, so you can keep teaching the children." "You'd do that? Leave your isolation?" "Grace, I'd follow you into hell itself if you asked." She stopped again, rising on her toes to kiss him softly. It was their first real kiss, tender and full of promise. When they parted, both were breathless. "No need for hell," she whispered. "I just want a life, a real life, with you." As they crested the last hill before the ranch, Jake saw riders approaching. His hand moved instinctively toward his gun, then relaxed. These were townspeople, led by Sam from the saloon and several of the Mexican families. "Senor Jake," called Miguel Chavez, the carpenter. "We heard there's to be a wedding. We want to help, build new furniture, maybe add rooms to your cabin. My wife, she wants to make a dress for Miss Grace," another added. "If she'll accept." Grace's eyes filled with tears again. Thank you, all of you." "This town," Sam said gruffly. "Sometimes we're slow to accept change, but we know courage when we see it. Both of you have shown that today." As the impromptu planning committee surrounded them with offers of help and suggestions, Jake felt something he hadn't experienced in years. Belonging. Not complete acceptance, that might never come, but a place in the fabric of the community. Later, after supper at the Martinez house with excited children and endless questions about the wedding, Jake prepared to leave for his cabin. Grace walked him to his horse. "One more night apart," she said, "for propriety's sake." "The longest night," he replied. "Jake, that first night, when I asked to sleep beside you, did you know even then?" He considered the question. "Know what?" "That we were meant for this, for each other." "I knew," he said slowly, "that something broke inside me when you asked, and something else started to heal." He mounted his horse, looked down at her. "Maybe that's the same thing." As he rode away, Jake thought about the violence of the day, the judgments of the town, the unexpected turns that had led to a proposal born of defiance as much as love. It wasn't the romantic story poets would tell, but it was theirs, written in blood and courage and the simple human need to not be alone. Tomorrow, he would marry Grace Porter. Tomorrow, his exile would truly end. Tonight, for the first time in 5 years. Jake Sullivan rode toward his empty cabin with a full heart, knowing it wouldn't be empty much longer. The stars wheeled overhead, indifferent to human struggles, but Jake found comfort in their distance. Some things endured despite the darkness. Some things were worth fighting for. Some things were worth living for. The wedding took place at sunset, when the desert painted itself in shades of gold and crimson. Grace wore a simple white dress that the Mexican women had worked through the night to finish, their skilled hands adding delicate embroidery along the hem. Jake stood waiting at the makeshift altar outside the church, his usually stoic face betraying hints of nervousness. The entire town had gathered, even those who'd spoken against them. Perhaps it was curiosity, or perhaps the events of recent days had shifted something in Bitter Creek's collective heart. Even Mrs. Henderson sat in the front row, her disapproving expression softened slightly by the undeniable romance of the moment. "Do you, Jake Sullivan, take this woman?" Reverend Mills began, but his words were cut short by the thunder of approaching hooves. Jake's hand moved to his gun as a lone rider crested the hill, riding hard. The man nearly fell from his horse, dust-covered and exhausted. It was Pete Wilson from the Hernandez Ranch, 15 miles south. "Raiders," he gasped. "Apache war party, maybe 20 strong. Hit the Hernandez place at dawn. We fought them off, but they're heading this way, picking off ranches as they go." A ripple of fear went through the crowd. Apache raids had been rare in recent years, but when they came, they brought death and destruction. Women clutched their children closer. Men looked to their weapons. "How long?" Sheriff Carter demanded. 2 hours, maybe less. They're taking their time, looting as they go. Jake felt Grace's hand slip into his. He looked down at her pale face, saw the fear she was trying to hide. Their wedding, it seemed, would have to wait. "Get the women and children to the church," Jake said, his voice carrying authority. It's got the thickest walls. Men who can shoot, take positions at the windows. Those who can't, gather water and ammunition. Now hold on, Mayor Aldrich blustered. You're not the law here. He's the only man here who's fought Apache before. Tom Martinez interrupted. I say we listen to him. Sheriff Carter nodded. Jake's in charge of defense. I'll organize the townspeople. As the crowd scattered, Grace caught Jake's arm. We could run, take horses, and— No. Jake's voice was firm. These people are our neighbors now. We don't abandon them. Our wedding will happen when this is over. He cupped her face gently. I need you to help with the wounded. There will be wounded. Grace nodded, steel replacing fear in her eyes. Be careful. Always am. But as Jake organized the town's defense, he knew careful might not be enough. 20 Apache warriors were a formidable force, especially against townspeople more used to ledgers than rifles. He positioned the best shooters at key points, set up a fallback position at the church, and tried not to think about how many of these people might not see another sunset. Sam from the saloon surprised him by proving to be a crack shot. Served in the Mexican War, he explained, checking his rifle. Been a while, but some things you don't forget. Jake understood that all too well. As the sun touched the horizon, they saw the dust cloud approaching. Jake watched through field glasses as the war party crested the rise, painted warriors on swift ponies, armed with rifles taken from previous raids. They paused at the edge of town, seeming to assess the defenses. Hold your fire, Jake called out. Wait for my signal. The Apaches spread out, beginning to circle the town. Jake recognized the tactic. Probe for weaknesses. Draw fire to locate defenders. He'd seen it in the war, adapted from Plains Indian tactics. Then one warrior rode forward alone, stopping just within rifle range. He was older than the others, his face weathered by decades of sun and conflict. When he spoke, his voice carried clearly in the evening air. White men, you have something that belongs to us. Sheriff Carter looked at Jake. What's he talking about? Jake had a sinking feeling he knew. Everyone check your homes, businesses, look for anything unusual, anyone hiding. The search didn't take long. Miguel Chavez found her, a young Apache woman, barely more than a girl, hidden in his barn. She was wounded, a bullet grazed across her ribs, and terrified. I found her this morning. Miguel explained. She was hurt, scared. I couldn't turn her away. Jake knelt beside the girl, speaking in the limited Apache he'd learned from scouts. She responded haltingly, painting a grim picture. She was the daughter of the war chief outside, taken in a raid by Mexican slavers, sold to a rancher who'd abused her. She'd escaped, been shot during pursuit, and hidden in the first shelter she found. They're not here to raid, Jake told the gathered townspeople. They're here for her, so give her back. Someone shouted. Let them take her and go. Look at her wounds, Grace said sharply. She'd been tending the girl with gentle hands. These are whip marks, burns. You want to send her back to that? Better than dying for some Indian girl. Mrs. Henderson said, though she couldn't meet Grace's eyes. Jake made a decision. Sheriff, I'm going to talk to them. That's suicide. Carter protested. Maybe, but it's better than a bloodbath. Jake checked his weapons. If something happens, Grace knows my wishes. He walked out slowly, hands visible but near his guns. The war chief watched him approach, dark eyes unreadable. I'm Jake Sullivan, he said in English, then repeated it in broken Apache. I know who you are. The chief replied in accented English. The killer who lives alone, now the killer who protects this town. Your daughter is hurt but safe. We didn't take her. She came to us. I know this also. The Mexican who hides her has honor. The chief's expression hardened. But she must come with us. She's terrified. Of you or of someone else. The chief's jaw tightened. Her fear is our shame. She was taken from us 2 seasons ago. We searched, but the slavers were like smoke. Then we heard whispers. A rancher named Garrison bought her, treated her like animal. Jake knew Garrison by reputation, a hard man who ran his spread with an iron fist. She escaped from him. Yes, he hunts her still. We hunt him. The chief leaned forward. Give us my daughter. We will leave your town in peace. And if she doesn't want to go? Something flickered in the warrior's eyes. Pain, perhaps. She is Apache. Her place is with her people. Even if those people frightened her into hiding. The chief was silent for a long moment. Then, bring her, let her choose. If she stays, we go. But the white man's town protects her from all who would take her, including Garrison. Jake weighed the offer. It was fair. More fair than he'd expected. Wait here. He returned to town to find heated debate in progress. Some wanted to force the girl out, others to fight, still others to negotiate. Jake cut through the noise. She chooses. If she stays, we protect her. If she goes, we let them leave in peace. You can't make that decision for all of us, Mayor Aldrich protested. Then vote. Jake's patience was wearing thin. But decide fast. Those warriors won't wait forever. Grace stood up. I vote we let her choose. How can we call ourselves civilized if we force a terrified girl back to bondage? Even if it means fighting Apache, someone challenged. Even then, Grace said firmly. Tom Martinez stood with her. I vote the same. We protect those who need protecting. One by one, others stood. Sam the bartender, Miguel Chavez, the Mexican families who knew what it was to be outsiders, even some who'd been ready to cast her out moments before. In the end, it was enough. Jake and Grace brought the Apache girl out. She clung to Grace's hand, eyes wide with fear as she saw the warriors. Her father dismounted, approaching slowly. When he spoke, his voice was gentle. In their own language, the girl responded hesitantly. Then with growing strength, finally, she turned to Grace, speaking in broken English. He says, he searches everywhere. Says he's sorry he not protect me before. Says, tears ran down her face. Says he kill Garrison for what he do. What do you want? Grace asked softly. You're safe either way. The girl looked between her father and the town, torn between two worlds. Finally, she walked to her father, collapsing against him. The chief held her like she was made of spun glass, his weathered face showing emotion Jake wouldn't have thought possible. But as they turned to go, hoofbeats announced new arrivals. Garrison and 6 of his men rode in from the east, armed and looking for trouble. They pulled up short at the sight of the Apache war party. Well, Garrison drawled. He was a big man, thick through the shoulders, with mean eyes. Looks like I arrived just in time. That's my property you've got there. Chief. The temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees. The chief handed his daughter to another warrior and faced Garrison. She is Apache, never property. I've got a bill of sale says different. Garrison's hand rested on his gun. Paid good money for her. I want her back or compensation. Jake stepped between them. Not happening. Garrison, she's under the protection of this town now. Garrison's eyes narrowed. Sullivan, should have known you'd be in the middle of this. You always did have a soft spot for strays. His gaze shifted to Grace. Speaking of which, that's a pretty piece you've got there. Maybe we can work out a trade. Jake's gun was in his hand before Garrison finished the sentence. Finish that thought and I'll put you down like the rabid dog you are. 7 of us, 1 of you. Garrison sneered. Plus, I doubt these townspeople want to side with savages against white men. 8 of us, Sam said, stepping up with his rifle. And I'd side with the devil himself against scum like you. Others joined them. Tom Martinez, Miguel Chavez. Even Reverend Mills picked up a shotgun. This is a house of God, he said. We don't trade in human misery here. The Apache warriors had spread out. Arrows knocked, rifles ready. Garrison's men shifted nervously. They'd expected to chase down one frightened girl, not face a united front of townspeople and Apache warriors. This is a mistake, Garrison snarled. You're choosing Redskins over your own kind. We're choosing right over wrong, Grace said clearly. Something you wouldn't understand. For a moment, violence trembled in the air like heat lightning. Jake could see it in Garrison's eyes, the calculation, the growing realization that he couldn't win this fight. Too many guns, too many variables. This isn't over, Garrison finally spat. That girl's mine by law. I'll be back with the territorial marshal. You do that, Sheriff Carter said. I'll be happy to show him the whip scars. Explain how you disciplined your property. Something tells me the judge won't look kindly on that. Garrison wheeled his horse around. You've made an enemy today. Sullivan, you and your whore both. Jake took a step forward, but Grace caught his arm. Let him go, she whispered. He's not worth it. As Garrison and his men rode off, the Apache chief approached Jake. You have honor, white man. This will not be forgotten. He looked at the townspeople. Your town is under Apache protection. Any who harm you harm us. With that, they were gone, melting into the gathering darkness like smoke. The crisis had passed without a shot fired, but Jake knew the repercussions would echo for months to come. Reverend Mills cleared his throat. Well, I believe we have a wedding to finish? As the townspeople regrouped, chattering excitedly about their stand against both Apache and Garrison. Grace took Jake's hand. You realize what we've done? She asked. Garrison won't forget. Neither will others like him. We've painted a target on this town. Maybe, Jake agreed. Or maybe we've shown that Bitter Creek stands for something more than just survival. He looked at the mixed crowd. White, Mexican, even a few Chinese merchants who joined the defense. Maybe we've started building the kind of place worth defending. The ceremony resumed as stars appeared overhead. This time, there were no interruptions. Reverend Mills spoke the words that bound them, his voice carrying new respect. When Jake kissed his bride, the cheer that went up could probably be heard all the way to Garrison's ranch. Later, as the impromptu celebration continued in the street, Jake and Grace slipped away. They stood together looking out at the desert, now silver under moonlight. Not the wedding you dreamed of, I imagine, Jake said. Grace laughed, the sound like music. I stopped dreaming of weddings when I was forced into my first one, but this, she gestured at the town behind them, still buzzing with excitement. This was perfect. We didn't just marry each other, Jake. We married this place, these people, for better or worse. For better or worse. Jake agreed, pulling her close. They had made their stand. Against prejudice, against evil, against the easy path of looking away. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. Garrison's threats, the complexities of a town that had chosen conscience over convenience, the daily work of building a life together. But tonight, Jake Sullivan held his wife under an infinite sky, and for the first time in memory, the future seemed full of possibility rather than dread. The war inside him hadn't ended, might never fully end, but Grace had given him something worth fighting for besides mere survival. In the distance, a coyote howled, and another answered. The desert continued its ancient conversation, indifferent to human drama. But in Bitter Creek, something had changed. A town of strangers had become a community. A killer had become a protector, and two damaged souls had found in each other the courage to face whatever came next. The stars wheeled overhead, marking time's passage with cosmic indifference. But below, in a small frontier town, love had found a way to bloom in the most unlikely soil. And sometimes, that was miracle enough. 3 months had passed since the wedding, and autumn painted the desert in shades of amber and rust. Jake and Grace had settled into a rhythm of life that felt both fragile and precious. The town had grown quieter, though the memory of Garrison's threats lingered like smoke on the wind. Jake was repairing the chicken coop when he heard the horses, too many and riding too fast. He straightened, hand instinctively checking his colt, as Sheriff Carter crested the hill with a dozen armed men. Their faces told him everything. Garrison? Jake asked, though he already knew. He's coming, Carter confirmed. Dismounting, Got himself appointed territorial deputy. He's bringing a judge who owes him favors and 20 hired guns. They'll be here by sunset. Grace emerged from the cabin, flour still dusting her hands from morning baking. One look at the men's faces drained the color from hers. How do you know? Apache scouts brought word. Tom Martinez said the chief kept his promise about protecting the town. But Jake, he hesitated. Garrison's put a bounty on you, $500, dead or alive. Says you murdered his men during that standoff. No one died that day, Grace said sharply. Truth doesn't matter when you own the judge. Carter replied grimly, he's coming for blood. You're specifically. Jake, but the whole town if we stand in his way. Jake felt the old familiar coldness settling into his bones. He'd known this day would come. Men like Garrison didn't forget humiliation. How long? He asked. 3 hours, maybe 4. Then we evacuate. Get the women and children to... No! Grace's voice cut through his words like steel. We don't run. Not from him. Grace, this isn't about courage. It's about survival. 20 guns. 20 hired killers who fight for money. She moved to stand beside him. We fight for our home. That matters. Tom cleared his throat. The thing is, Jake, the town's already decided. We're not giving you up. Not you, not anyone. Garrison wants a war. He'll get one. Jake looked at the assembled men, shopkeepers and ranchers, men who had everything to lose and no obligation to protect him. This isn't your fight. The hell it isn't, Sam spat. We stood together against the Apache situation, showed what Bitter Creek is made of. We back down now. We might as well burn the town ourselves. Sheriff Carter nodded. We've sent riders to neighboring settlements, but help won't come in time. This is on us. He met Jake's eyes. Question is, how do we fight men like that? Jake's mind was already working, remembering terrain, calculating angles. We don't fight them straight up. We can't. But 20 hired guns are 20 men who want to live to spend their pay. We make the cost too high, they'll break. What do you need? Tom asked. Every man who can shoot, every rifle, every round of ammunition, and oil, all the lamp oil in town. Jake's smile was wolf sharp. Garrison wants to play soldier? Let's show him what real war looks like. The next 3 hours transformed Bitter Creek into a fortress. Under Jake's direction, they built barricades, positioned shooters, created kill zones where attackers would be exposed to crossfire. Women who could shoot took positions alongside the men, even Reverend Mills, who'd preached peace just months before, checked his rifle with grim determination. Grace worked tirelessly, organizing ammunition distribution and medical supplies. When she passed Jake, she pressed his hand briefly. Whatever happens, I regret nothing. We're going to live through this. He told her. I know, but if we don't... She smiled, sad and beautiful. These months with you have been worth everything. As the sun slanted low, dust rose on the horizon. Jake watched through field glasses as Garrison's force approached, a dark line of riders bristling with weapons. They stopped just outside rifle range, making camp with insulting leisure. A rider broke from the group, approaching under a white flag. Jake recognized him. Garrison Segundo, a cold-eyed killer named Dutch Williams. Sullivan, Dutch called out. Mister, Garrison offers terms. Give yourself up, and the town goes unharmed. You've got 1 hour to decide. Tell Garrison he can go to hell, Jake replied calmly, and take you with him. Dutch smiled unpleasantly. He thought you'd say that. Asked me to give you this. He tossed something that landed in the dirt. Jake picked it up, his blood running cold. It was a woman's hair ribbon, stained with blood. That's from the Martinez girl, Dutch said. Little Rosa. Seems she was visiting the Hendricks Ranch when we passed by. Sweet little thing. Be a shame if something happened to her. The words hit like physical blows. Rosa, the girl who'd stood witness at Grace's wedding, who called her Aunt Grace now. Tom Martinez made a sound like a wounded animal. If you've heard her, Jake began. She's fine, for now. Dutch's smile widened. But accidents happen in firefights, especially to little Mexican girls no one important will miss. Jake's hand moved toward his gun, but Grace caught his wrist. Her face was pale, but her voice steady. Where is she? Safe with Mr. Garrison. Like I said, give up Sullivan, and everyone goes home happy. I'll need proof she's alive, Jake said through gritted teeth. You'll get it, when Sullivan's in chains. Dutch wheeled his horse around. 1 hour. As he rode away, pandemonium erupted. Tom was ready to charge Garrison's camp single-handed. Others talked of negotiating, of finding another way. Through it all, Jake stood silent, the hair ribbon clutched in his fist. I have to go, he said finally. No. Grace's voice was fierce. That's not happening. They have Rosa, and if you give yourself up, they'll kill her anyway. You know this. She gripped his shoulders. Garrison doesn't want justice. He wants revenge. On you, on the town, on everyone who stood against him. Then what do we do? Tom's voice broke. That's my goddaughter out there. Jake looked at the assembled townspeople, scared but determined. Ready to fight but horrified at the cost, he made a decision that went against every instinct screaming for caution. We attack. The silence was deafening. Then Sheriff Carter spoke. Come again. They expect us to ford up, wait for their assault. Instead, we hit them first, tonight, while they're confident, careless. Jake's eyes were cold as winter stone. Small group, get Rosa, then fall back and dare them to follow. That's suicide, someone protested. No, that's tactics. Jake turned to Tom. You know where Garrison would keep her? His wagon. He always travels with that big Conestoga. Likes his comforts. Tom's eyes lit with desperate hope. You think it could work? With the right people. Jake looked around. I need volunteers. This won't be a stand-up fight. It'll be knife work, close and ugly. 5 men stepped forward immediately. Tom, of course. Sam, Miguel Chavez, 2 of the younger ranchers, veterans of Indian fights. Grace started to step forward, but Jake stopped her. I need you here. If this goes bad, someone has to lead the defense. She wanted to argue. He could see it in her eyes, but she nodded. Bring her back, both of you. As full darkness fell, Jake led his small force out through a dry wash that cut behind the town. They moved like shadows, years of frontier living having taught them silence. Jake felt the old training take over. Move, pause, listen, move again. Garrison's camp was overconfident, their sentries posted carelessly. Jake identified the Conestoga wagon near the center, lamplight glowing through its canvas. 2 guards lounged nearby, passing a bottle between them. Jake touched Tom's shoulder, pointed. Tom nodded, understanding. They split up, circling wide. Jake counted heartbeats, letting the night sounds cover their approach. Then he moved. The first guard died without a sound, Jake's knife finding the gap below his ribs. The second managed half a shout before Tom's blade silenced him. They dragged the bodies into shadow as the others dealt with perimeter guards. Jake slipped to the wagon, listening. Inside, a man's voice slurred with drink. Stop that sniveling, brat. You're giving me a headache. A child's sob. Rosa. Jake entered the wagon like death itself. The guard inside had just enough time to widen his eyes before Jake's fist dropped him. Rosa huddled in the corner, tied and gagged, her face streaked with tears and dirt. Shh, pequeña, Jake whispered, cutting her bonds. Your Uncle Tom is here. We're taking you home. But as they emerged from the wagon, shouts erupted. Someone had found the bodies. Lanterns flared to life. In seconds, the camp would be fully aroused. Run! Jake shouted. Abandoning stealth, they scattered, following the planned escape routes. Gunfire erupted, muzzle flashes strobing in the darkness. Jake carried Rosa, her arms tight around his neck, as bullets whined past like angry hornets. A figure loomed from the darkness. Dutch Williams. Gun raised. Jake twisted, shielding Rosa with his body, expecting the impact. Instead, Dutch grunted and toppled, Sam's rifle smoking from 20 yards away. "Move! Damn it!" Sam yelled, working his lever action. They ran. Garrison's roars of rage following them. The camp was fully alive now. Men mounting horses, torches flaring. But Jake's team had the darkness and knowledge of terrain. One by one, they melted away, regrouping at the prearranged point. "Anyone hit?" Jake asked, breathing hard. Miguel took one in the shoulder. Tom reported. "But he'll make it. Good. Back to town. Fast." "They'll be coming now. Mad as hell." They made it back just as Garrison's force crested the rise. Spread out in a battle line. Jake handed Rosa to Grace, who clutched the girl fiercely. Around them, townspeople took their positions, fear replaced by anger at the kidnapping of a child. Garrison himself rode forward, just within shouting distance. In the torchlight, his face was twisted with rage. "Sullivan, you just signed this town's death warrant. You signed it when you took a child," Jake called back. "But I'll make you a deal. Garrison, you and me, single combat, winner takes all." A stir went through both forces. Grace gripped Jake's arm. "No, trust me," he whispered. Garrison laughed harshly. "You think I'm stupid? I know your reputation. Killer. No, we do this my way. Last chance. Surrender. Or we burn this town to ash with everyone in it. Then come try." For a moment, nothing moved. Then Garrison raised his hand, and his men surged forward with a collective roar. "Fire!" Jake commanded. The night exploded. Rifles cracked from windows and rooftops. Jake had positioned his people well. The attackers rode into concentrated fire from multiple angles. Men tumbled from saddles. Horses screamed and fled. But Garrison's men were hardened fighters. They dismounted, took cover, returned fire with discipline. The battle seesawed back and forth, muzzle flashes lighting the night like deadly fireflies. Jake moved along the line, directing fire, shifting defenders to meet threats. Grace worked with the wounded, her dress already bloody, the air filled with smoke and screams and the copper scent of death. Then Jake saw it, a group of attackers with torches, circling wide to flank the town. If they reached the buildings, fire would do what bullets couldn't. He grabbed 3 men and intercepted them in a vicious, close-quarter fight among the outbuildings. Jake's world narrowed to violence. Shoot, move, reload, shoot again. A man came at him with a knife. Jake broke his arm and took the blade, used it on the next attacker. He was back in the war, except this time he fought for something worth saving. A bullet caught him high in the shoulder, spinning him around. He stayed on his feet through pure will, fired left-handed, dropped another attacker. Blood ran hot down his chest, but he kept fighting. Then, suddenly, it was over. The attack broke like a wave on stone. Garrison's remaining men fled into the darkness, leaving their dead and wounded behind. Jake leaned against a wall, trying to stay upright as Grace found him. "You're hit." Her hands were gentle but urgent, pressing cloth to his wound. "I'm alive." He caught her hand. "Rosa?" "Safe. Tom has her." Tears ran down her face. "Don't you dare die on me, Jake Sullivan." "Not planning to." Sheriff Carter approached, his arm in a sling. "Garrison's dead. Took a bullet in the throat. His men scattered when he fell." Jake felt no satisfaction, only exhaustion. Around them, Bitter Creek took stock. They'd lost 3 men, with 7 wounded, but they'd held. The town had survived. As Grace worked to stop his bleeding, Jake saw the dawn breaking over the desert, pale gold washing away the night's horrors. People emerged from cover, some weeping, others just staring at what they'd accomplished. Reverend Mills said a prayer over the dead, theirs and Garrison's men alike. There was no celebration, just the grim satisfaction of survival and the knowledge that they'd paid a terrible price for it. Later, as the doctor worked on Jake's shoulder, Grace sat beside him, still in her blood-stained dress. "You knew Garrison wouldn't accept single combat." "I hoped he would. But either way, it made him angry, careless. In war, an angry enemy is a defeated enemy." He winced as the doctor probed. "Usually. We can't keep doing this," Grace said quietly. fighting off every threat, losing people each time. No, Jake agreed. But maybe we won't have to. Word will spread about what happened here, that Bitter Creek stands together. That might be enough to discourage the next garrison. Tom Martinez appeared with Rosa, who broke free and ran to Jake. "You saved me," she whispered. "We all did." Jake told her, "That's what family does." As the sun climbed higher, painting away the shadows of night, Jake looked at the faces around him, tired, bloodied, but unbroken. They'd faced the darkness together and emerged into light. His shoulder throbbed, a wound that would leave another scar to join his collection. But as Grace squeezed his hand and Rosa hugged his good arm, Jake thought some scars were worth bearing, some fights were worth fighting, and sometimes, against all odds, the good people won. 5 years had passed since the night garrison fell. Bitter Creek had grown from a rough frontier settlement into a proper town, with a school, a courthouse, and even a small newspaper. Jake Sullivan stood at the window of that school, watching his wife teach a classroom full of eager faces, children of all colors learning together, a sight that would have been impossible in the old days. Grace's hair showed the first threads of silver now, and the lines around her eyes spoke of laughter more than sorrow. She moved among the students with a natural authority, her voice carrying the lesson about the Constitution. Little Ana Martinez, now 9 years old, raised her hand with a question that made Grace smile. Jake touched his shoulder absently. It still ached when storms came through. The wound from that night had never quite healed right, but he'd lived with worse pain. He turned from the window and walked slowly down Main Street, noting the changes time had wrought. Sam's saloon now served food as well as whiskey, run by his daughter who'd come west after her mother died. Tom Martinez had expanded his ranch and taken in 3 more orphaned children. The Apache traded freely in town, their chief's protection having evolved into genuine friendship. But change had come with a price. Sheriff Carter lay beneath a simple stone in the cemetery, having died peacefully in his sleep 2 winters past. Miguel Chavez had moved his family to California, seeking opportunities in the growing cities there. And Jake himself, well, the years had gentled him some, but never completely tamed the wolf inside. "Mr. Sullivan." Jake turned to find young William Henderson, son of the woman who'd once condemned Grace, running toward him. The boy had his mother's features, but kinder eyes. "What is it, Will? Ma wanted me to ask, would you and Mrs. Sullivan come for supper Sunday? She's feeling poorly again and wants to make things right." Jake studied the boy. Mrs. Henderson had been ailing for months, and everyone knew she wouldn't see another Christmas. "Tell your mother we'll be there." As the boy ran off, Jake continued his walk to the small house he and Grace had built on the edge of town, close enough to be part of the community, but far enough to see the desert stretch endlessly beyond. Their home was modest, but filled with life. Books Grace used for teaching, paintings by local artists, photographs of town gatherings where Jake stood awkwardly in the back, still uncomfortable with crowds. That evening, as they prepared dinner together, Grace told him about her day. "Rosa Martinez is ready for advanced mathematics. I've written to a college back east that accepts women." A knock interrupted her. Jake opened the door to find a stranger, a young woman, travel-worn and nervous, with familiar eyes that made his breath catch. "I'm looking for Jake Sullivan," she said hesitantly. "You found him." "I'm Sarah Whitman, but my maiden name was Sullivan." She swallowed hard. "I'm your sister's daughter. Your niece." Jake gripped the doorframe. He hadn't heard from his family in over a decade, not since he'd left to protect them from what he'd become. Grace appeared at his shoulder. "Please, come in. You must be exhausted." As Sarah settled at their table with coffee and food, her story unfolded. Jake's sister had died of consumption 3 years past, never having told her daughter much about the uncle who disappeared after the war. But Sarah had found letters, pieced together the story. "I'm in trouble," she admitted. "My husband, former husband now, he's a mean drunk. I left him, but he's following. Says I'm his property, that the law's on his side. She looked at Jake with desperate hope. Mother always said if I was ever in real trouble, to find you. Said you'd protect family. Jake felt Grace's hand on his arm, grounding him. The old familiar anger stirred. Another man treating a woman as property. Another runner seeking sanctuary. But this time it was blood kin, bringing his past crashing into his carefully built present. You're safe here, Grace said firmly. Bitter Creek protects its own. Sarah's eyes filled with tears. I didn't know where else to go. I have some money saved. I can work. Tomorrow we'll worry about that. Jake cut in gently. Tonight, you rest. They gave Sarah their spare room. And later, Jake and Grace sat on their porch watching the stars wheel overhead. The desert wind carried the scent of sage and distant rain. Trouble's coming again, Grace said quietly. Always does. Jake took her hand. Question is, am I bringing it to her or is she bringing it to us? Does it matter? She's family. Jake thought about that. Family, a concept he'd abandoned for so long. Now the center of everything. Not just Grace, but the town itself had become a kind of extended clan, bound by shared struggles and mutual protection. The next days passed peacefully enough. Sarah proved herself capable and eager to work, helping Grace with the school while learning the rhythms of frontier life. But Jake noticed the way she startled at sudden sounds, constantly checked over her shoulder. He recognized the behavior. Prey that knew it was being hunted. On the fourth day, his instincts proved right. 3 men rode into town, hard-faced and asking questions. Jake watched from the sheriff's office, now run by Deputy Torres. A good man if young, as they made their way methodically through town. That's him, Sarah whispered, peering through the window. The tall one, Robert Whitman, the others are his brothers. Jake studied them with a soldier's eye. They moved with the confidence of men used to violence, but it was bullying violence. The kind that targeted the weak. Not seasoned fighters, just cruel ones. Stay here, Jake told Sarah. Torres might want to have that scattergun ready. He stepped onto the boardwalk just as Whitman noticed him. The man's eyes narrowed in recognition, not of Jake personally, but of what he represented, an obstacle. You'd be Sullivan, Whitman said. It wasn't a question. I'm here for my wife, Sarah Whitman. I know she's here. Former wife, from what I understand, and she doesn't want to see you. Whitman's face reddened. The law says, I know what the law says. Jake's voice was calm, almost conversational. I also know what's right. You're not taking her. She's my property, Whitman snarled. Bought and paid for with a wedding ring. You got no right. I've got every right. She's my blood. Jake let his coat fall open, revealing the worn colt. And in this town, we don't hold with men who beat women. The brothers shifted, hands moving toward weapons. But before violence could erupt, the street filled with townspeople. They came quietly but purposefully. Tom Martinez and his vaqueros, Sam with his shotgun, even Reverend Mills with his Bible in one hand and a rifle in the other. Grace emerged from the school with several armed mothers. Whitman looked around, calculating odds. This is kidnapping. I'll bring the law. Bring it, Deputy Torres said, stepping out with his star prominent. I'll be happy to discuss with any lawman how you broke Sarah Whitman's arm last year, how you burned her with a poker. Got witnesses to that back in Missouri. Don't we? Jake hadn't known about the abuse details, but he read the truth in Whitman's suddenly pale face. The man was realizing his version of events wouldn't stand unchallenged. You can't protect her forever, Whitman said finally. We'll be back. No, Jake said softly. You won't. Something in his tone made Whitman step back. Jake had spoken with absolute certainty, the way a man states that water is wet or fire burns. It wasn't a threat, it was simply truth. The 3 men mounted up and rode out, but Jake knew it wasn't over. Men like Whitman didn't accept defeat easily. They'd be back, probably at night, probably thinking to catch the town sleeping. That evening, Jake found Sarah helping Grace with dinner. Tell me about the abuse. he said gently. Sarah's hand stilled on the vegetables she was cutting. Slowly, haltingly. She told them everything. The gradual escalation from harsh words to violence. The isolation from friends and family. The final night when she'd thought he would kill her. "I should have been stronger," she whispered. "Should have left sooner." "Strength isn't about enduring abuse," Grace said firmly. "It's about surviving it and finding the courage to seek help. You're here." That took tremendous strength. Jake listened, remembering another woman who'd fled a man who thought he owned her. The cycles of violence, repeating endlessly unless someone stood up and said, "No more." That night, Jake's intuition proved correct. Just after midnight, horses approached the town from multiple directions, but Bitter Creek was ready. Jake had learned from past attacks. Watchers were posted, signals arranged. By the time Whitman and a dozen hired guns reached Main Street, the town was armed and waiting. "Last warning, Whitman!" Jake called from the shadows. "Turn around! Don't come back! Give me my wife, and this ends peaceful," Whitman shouted back. "She's not yours." Sarah's voice rang out, surprising everyone. She stood on the school steps, Grace beside her. "I'm not property. I'm not cattle. I'm a person, and I choose to stay here." "You don't get to choose," Whitman roared. "You swore before God." "I swore to love and obey," Sarah shot back. "Not to be beaten, not to live in fear. You broke those vows long before I left." Jake felt a surge of pride at his niece's courage. But he also saw Whitman's control snapping, saw him reach for his gun. Jake drew and fired in one motion. His bullet caught Whitman's gun, sending it spinning into the dirt. "Next one goes center mass," Jake said calmly. For a moment, nobody moved. Then one of Whitman's hired guns decided to earn his pay. He cleared leather fast, but Tom Martinez was faster, his rifle speaking once. The gunman toppled from his saddle. That broke the spell. Some of Whitman's men fled immediately, unwilling to face an entire armed town. Others tried to fight. The battle was brief but vicious, ending with 4 dead gunmen and Whitman on his knees in the dirt, clutching a wounded arm. "You should kill me," he gasped. "Otherwise I'll keep coming." Jake stood over him, gun steady. For a moment, the old darkness rose. How easy it would be to end this threat permanently. But then he felt Grace's presence, saw Sarah watching with eyes that had seen too much violence already. "No," Jake said finally. "You'll live, but you'll sign papers releasing all claim to Sarah. Then you'll head east and never come west of the Mississippi again. Deputy Torres will make sure those terms are very clear. And if I don't," Jake smiled coldly, "then I'll find you. Might take a month, might take a year, but I'll find you. And we'll have a different conversation." Whitman looked into Jake's eyes and saw his own death waiting there, patient and certain. He nodded, defeated. As Torres led Whitman away to formalize the papers, Sarah threw herself into Jake's arms. "Uncle Jake, thank you." Jake held his niece, feeling something heal inside him that he hadn't even known was still broken. Family, protection, purpose, all the things he'd run from. Now the foundation of his life. Later, as dawn broke over Bitter Creek, Jake stood with Grace watching the desert come alive with color. Sarah slept peacefully in their spare room, truly safe for the first time in years. "You've changed," Grace observed. The old Jake would have killed Whitman without hesitation. Maybe, or maybe the old Jake would have run rather than get involved. He pulled her close. "You changed me. This town changed me." "No," Grace said softly. "You changed yourself. We just gave you reasons to." As the sun climbed higher, townspeople emerged to begin another day. Children ran to school. Merchants opened their shops. Life continued its eternal rhythm. But now there was a new story to add to Bitter Creek's legend, how they'd stood together once again, how they'd protected one of their own. Jake knew there would be other challenges. The frontier was still wild, still dangerous. But as he watched Sarah emerge to help Grace with breakfast, as he heard the laughter of children playing in the street, he felt something he'd thought lost forever, hope. From the ashes of war and violence, they'd built something worth defending, a place where justice mattered more than law, where community meant more than convention, where broken people could find wholeness. That night, Sarah asked to hear the story of how Jake and Grace met. As Grace told it, embellishing here, softening there, Jake listened and remembered. That desperate woman in a dusty saloon. That dangerous question in the darkness. Can I sleep beside you, cowboy? Now, years later, the answer had become more than either of them could have imagined. Not just sleep, but life. Not just beside, but together. Not just survival, but love. Love that had grown to encompass a whole town, a whole way of being in the world, as stars emerged in the vast western sky. Jake Sullivan sat surrounded by family, both blood and chosen, and knew that every scar, every fight, every hard choice had led to this moment. The lonely soldier had become a protector. The killer had become a guardian. The man who'd hidden from the world had become one of its pillars. And, in the end, that was the greatest victory of all. Not the gunfights won or enemies defeated, but the simple triumph of connection over isolation, of love over fear, of community over solitude. The desert wind sang its ancient song, but now Jake heard it differently. Not a lament for the lost and lonely, but a celebration of the found and cherished. He reached for Grace's hand, felt Sarah lean against his shoulder, and was content. In Bitter Creek, the broken found healing, the lost found home. And sometimes, if you were very lucky, you found that the question that had once frozen you solid, "Can I sleep beside you, cowboy?" had become the answer that set you free. Thank you all for listening to this Wild West love story. If you're enjoying these tales from the American frontier, I'd love to know where you're listening from. Leave a comment below and let's connect. Don't forget to subscribe to the From Wild West channel for more stories of courage, romance, and survival in the untamed territories. Share your thoughts about Jake and Grace's journey in the comments. Until next time, partners.